Good afternoon. You're watching Business World Live. I'm Jes Delos Santos. Let's take a look at how the local bourse closed today, Wednesday. Okay, we're going to take a different tune today. We're going to kick off the broadcast by fixing our eyes on Ayala Corporation, its property unit, Ayala Land. If you try to take a look at this chart right here of our leaders and laggards, you'd see both stocks surpassing declines of the main index. You have Ayala Corporation, the day's worst performer, down by as much as 3.75% to 795 apiece. That, in fact, is already better than how it fared earlier in the day. The stock sunk as much as 6.1%, more than any full-day loss since March of 2020. Its real estate arm, Ayala Land, likewise falling over 2% to 38 pesos and 85 centavos per share. Both stocks chipped in for more than half of the PSEi's 55-point loss today. Now, the two stocks slump also faced declines seen across the bellwether index as shares drop for the fourth day. You have here the index slipping by over 0.75%, sinking farther from 7,200 to 7,143.30. A last-minute rally at the close once again, as you can see right here, propelling shares upward from a 1.6% loss early in the day. But the spike just is not enough to pull off some gains here. The gauge has so far lost 1.8% over the past 4 days. You have Japet and Chanko of Phil Stocks attributing this to pandemic fears and waning economic and corporate recovery hopes due to a lack of any fresh leads or catalysts, is giving the index a gloomy forecast, expecting it to drop even further to 6,900 in the near term, should it be unable to return to 7,150 or even 7,200. But the local bourse is not alone in the region. Japanese indices also ending the day lower here. At least if you can try to see this chart right here, you have the topics, which is down 0.3%. The Nikkei likewise also closing the day down 0.4%. This as other Asian stocks edged higher, the likes of Hang Seng still at least trading higher by 0.9%. The Shenzhen likewise ending the day up 1.4%. Shanghai also up by 0.5%. And of course, the Kospi also in the green here, soaring by 0.7%. This as investors try to make sense of comments signaling that incoming U.S. President Joe Biden is likely to have a tough line stance toward China. This is Biden's cabinet picks hinted that the new administration would actually continue some of Trump's hardline economic policies toward China. Some of the officials, in fact, promised to battle abusive trade practices and bar products from the Uyghur Muslim minority region of China. The relationship between the two economies, if you try to listen to experts, they're saying they're expecting it to actually remain fraught under Biden. Biden is expected to be sworn in just a few hours from now at around 1 in the morning. That's Thursday in Manila. Ahead of that, U.S. stocks poised for gains here as futures rose for the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones. As you can see here, S&P 500 looking at least to gain here, up by 0.25%. Same thing with the Dow Jones here, up close to 0.1%. The Nasdaq, though, proving to be flat here, although on the downside, there's a lot are really banking on the transition of power that is set to happen just a few hours away over in the U.S. Now back to our shores. Here are other stories from the corporate front. Filipina Shell has confirmed to the stock exchange that it plans to open 50 to 70 more sites this year. Filipina Shell CEO Cesar Romero said the company has been taking steps to reshape its portfolio for a resilient, adaptive, and future-ready organization. Filipina Shell has over 1,000 retail sites nationwide. Romero also said during a virtual event that its solar farm in Tabangao, Batangas has been supplying power to the company's import terminal since December. Back in August, Filipina Shell announced that it was shutting down its Tabangao oil refinery due to economic reasons and would convert the facility into an import terminal instead. Now, Merado says the pending extension of lifeline power rate subsidies will have no effect on its distribution since these are paid for by non-life consumers. The power distributor is referring to a bill recently approved in Senate which extends the lifeline subsidy rate for households consuming less than 100 kilowatt hour per month. Merado says they are deferring to the wisdom of lawmakers. However, the company notes that while scheme benefits certain households, their discounts are being funded by other customers. Households who qualify for lifeline subsidies are entitled to discounts of up to 5% of their monthly bills. Now, if passed into law, the extension will run until 2031, benefiting some 5 million households who stand to save as much as 900 pesos on electricity expenses per year. Meralco is up 1 and 3/10% at 293 pesos and 80 centavos apiece. Now, here are other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. The government is pushing ahead with the modernization of the Bureau of Internal Agency with a fresh grant from the United States. Philippine Star reports that President Duterte has instructed the Finance Department to iron out the details of the 39 million peso grant from the United States Trade and Development Agency. If negotiations push through, the U.S. will give the funds at no interest cost. The grant will cover the financing needs of the tax agency's digitalization program with a shift to online transactions fast-tracked by the pandemic. The Tax Bureau has been beefing up its digital infrastructure for the past years to improve collection. The Finance Department said the effort has been paying off with the country's tax effort at 14.5% of GDP as of 2019, up from 13% in 2015. Streaming company Netflix also took advantage of global lockdowns as it surpasses 200 million subscribers. Netflix has added some 8.5 million paid subscribers in the last quarter, pushing its users at around 203 million. Netflix shares in the US jumped more than 12% after reports as revenue surged, but not enough to keep profits from falling in the fourth quarter. Netflix has invested heavily in original content with more competitors in the market, the likes of Apple, Disney, and Comcast, among others. The streaming giant says over 500 titles are in post-production and being readied for release, with plans to launch at least one new original film weekly. Now, the world's eyes will be glued to the U.S. as they welcome a new leadership under President-elect Joe Biden, who is set to be inaugurated as the world superpower's 46th president in just a few hours. But why should it matter for a country like the Philippines? Let's discuss that with Professor Emmanuel Leyco. He is the president of the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila. Good afternoon, Professor Leyco.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to our viewers.
Okay, sir, in broad strokes here, is a Biden presidency a welcome change for the Philippines, or are we just dealing with the same beast but under a different name?
Well, definitely, we're not going to deal with the same personality. However, this is also a case where we don't really have a choice, but we have to make sure that we are on the right footing with the new leader of the United States. The U.S. is a major trading partner of the Philippines. We share a lot of history with the U.S. So I think it is important for us to be able to know where we will stand with this new leader.
And speaking of trade there, Professor Leyco, much of the world's trade, of course, would depend on the U.S. And you have now a number of Biden's cabinet picks already signaling in their confirmation hearings, at least, that Biden will more or less continue their hardline stance on China. What might this mean for the Philippines, and how should the China-leaning Duterte administration play its cards?
Well, we import a lot from China right now. We export a lot to the U.S. So between our imports and exports, our major import partner or source is China, whereas the major export destination for Philippine products is the U.S. Will the Philippines be affected by the new stance of the U.S. towards China. Uh, I don't think the U.S. is really changing much when it comes to dealing with China. I think they would like to protect U.S. interests in China, and therefore things will kind of remain the same when it comes to the U.S. and China relationships concerned. Now, how will that affect the Philippines? Will that affect our exports to the U.S. or will that affect our imports from China? Um, Depending on the kind of stance that the U.S. will impose on China, because our relationship is not exactly direct. No, when we export to the U.S., they also impose certain rules and regulations, certain policies, whether or not they will make our exports cheaper or not. They might impose also stricter rules against our trade relations with China. So, for example, uh, they might restrict the components that we export to China, I mean to the U.S. Based on its origins. Because right now, I think we should be able to export mostly our own products that originate only from the Philippines. But if we export electronics, there are a lot of electronic parts that we borrow from China, and therefore they might restrict, use of Chinese technology from what we export to the U.S. On the other hand, imports from China, would they penalize the Philippines if we align ourselves too much with the U.S.? I think that will be another story. But right now, I don't see any major change. But there are possibilities that might happen when they escalate the trade war among the two countries. Necessarily, the Philippines might be a collateral damage or might be a collateral beneficiary, so to speak. Right now, I think we need to hold our bets for now, how it will affect the Philippine-China trade relations and the Philippine-U.S. trade relations.
Okay, so it's status quo for now, but at the same time, we have to prepare for at least a possible escalation of the trade war and how that might actually impact the country. But moving on from there, Professor Leyco, what's the expectation here regarding control of the South China Sea? The U.S., even under Trump, did not, in a way, in a matter of speaking, did not waver in the disputed territory. Do you expect a tougher stance under Biden?
I think it will continue what the Trump administration implemented during their time. And remember, Trump was more like he wanted to gain more respect for the U.S. when it comes to leadership, when it comes to presence, when it comes to superiority. Trump, I think, tried his best. On the other hand, would the Biden administration try to do less than what Trump did? I don't think so. So, so far as the South China Seas or the West Philippine Sea is concerned, I think, again, just like on our trade, it's best that we keep it on a status quo, but we can anticipate how the Chinese escalate its presence in China might also prompt the U.S. to escalate their presence and their actions in the West Philippine Sea.
And lastly now, Professor Leyco, do you see Biden working more closely with the Philippines compared to his predecessor, in a way convince the country to pivot once again to the U.S. from China? And how quickly should he move to revive ties with the country?
There might be an issue when it comes to relationship of the Biden administration or the Democrats with the Philippines. As we know, once the Democratic Party takes over, they are more focused on human rights, development goals, and so on and so forth. So they might escalate also the issue on human rights in the Philippines. So that might be what is different from Trump and the Biden administration. The Biden administration, having the legacy of the Democratic Party, who's very focused on human rights and development, equity, around the world would probably raise that as an issue. But on the other hand, I think the presence of the USID in the Philippines will be more focused on development requirements of the Philippines with the Democrats now at the helm.
Okay, still human rights, of course, as we all know, a major sticking point for the Duterte administration. Let's see how that is going to come into play once Biden officially takes office. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Professor Emmanuel Leyco, President of the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila.
Salamat.
And those are the biggest news this trading day, January 20, 2021. Catch Businessworld Live again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for the market open and 3:15 p.m. for the market close. I'm Jes Delos Santos. We are One News.